Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Meller Notes podcast. My name is William Meller, and today I would like to reflect a little bit about the 3 months that we see already in 2026. What is actually happening, or what happened that impact the most in something related to your career, the way you are leading, the way you are managing in your company? Because many things are happening quite fast. We have so many changes. We have so many, impactful things happening around us that change or appear at least to change the way we work. But things that appear to change so fast, they also have this kind of tendency to show us something from the data. And that's why I usually, when I'm preparing this podcast or the episode itself, the topics we are going to discuss, I try to see what is actually happening behind the numbers, behind the hype that can actually be discussed in a good way. To calm down from the hype, to calm down from the noisy around us, and trying to understand what is really happening that can change the road of our careers. And that is the focus again. But after going through this 3 months in 2026, I thought it would be a good moment to reflect what impacted the most this year so far that is relevant for a discussion here to make us improve a little bit more, 1% better than the version we were yesterday. And to make this happen, I want to bring a little bit of three topics that they are quite connected, and we see they are impacting everyone across the world, not in one single country, not one single kind of industry, but it's kind of a trending thing around us that show that for some reason we are working differently already in 2026. The first topic we are going to cover, it's about how fast things are changing. We are tired actually of so many changes, it seems. At least it's what research is showing to us. Then we are going to talk a little bit on the AI, or the difference between AI promises and AI result. And maybe we are having a quite of a gap between the expectation we had from AI in our companies and the actual results that we are seeing after around 3 years of this technology working with us or together with us or around us in our different businesses. And of course, we are also going to bring a little bit or touch a little bit on a topic that is it's been quite discussed after some research recently around the trust in the companies, because for some reason we are seeing that people are losing, or at least appear to be losing, the trust they have in their leadership, or at least in the senior leadership holding a company strategy together. But as always in our podcast, in our open conversation, the focus here is to have this kind of reflection, look into what is actually, the message behind the research, behind those topics, that we can evaluate and together think a little bit. I got this interesting comment other day from someone who told me that they were pausing the podcast. I don't remember which episode it was, but they are pausing to actually think a little bit, not to take notes, but to think a little bit on what was being discussed at that point. And that is interesting because I don't want you to agree with everything I'm saying. And I don't want you to, of course, just listen for the sake of listening. I want you to follow through with me. I want this to be an open, almost an open discussion between me and who are listening. So you can actually reflect on how those things are actually moving or changing or making you think at least different in your life. Okay. And as always, I prepared for this episode another story that will make a great connection to the topics we are going to discuss today. Okay, are you ready? Right, let's go then. So, this one is quite an impressive one. When I was doing my research, I got this from actually a book. It's a story that is connected to change and how we react to change. And here we go. In 1847, in a hospital in Vienna, Austria, a doctor called Ignaz Semmelweis noticed something quite disturbing. He noticed that the death rate for mothers in childbirth, in giving birth, was around 18% for those who were attended by doctors. But it was only 2% in those mothers attended by midwives. 18 to 2%, quite impressive number. And that was quite disturbing as well for him when he tried to understand the reason. So he started some investigation and some research, and he found out the difference. The doctors, they were going straight from autopsies directly to the room and to the livers of the baby without washing their hands. We are talking about 1847, okay? Remember that part. So he introduced in that hospital a mandatory exercise, or a simple one, that the doctors were supposed to wash their hands always with chlorine solution. And the death rate dropped from 18% to around, or less actually, than 2% in just a few weeks. So it was like super connected again to the same rate realized from the midwives. So that was quite impressive. And the research itself was confirmed after testing or doing it in a different scenario, or in this case, a different hospital. The problem was he tried to publish, and he got some big troubles on that. Why? Well, the medical community just completely resisted to that data. Even though the study was well conducted, it was using all the right methods to prove the relation between the drop on the death rate and washing their hands. But the medical community was completely against it. Actually, they tried to ridiculize this doctor, or make him a monster just because he was doing this kind of bringing this kind of research to light. For the medical community, basically accepting this kind of data was the same as saying that themselves, the doctors, were responsible for those deaths. Semmelweis, the doctor, he was committed to an asylum, and he got a lot of sued people, met doctors going against him, saying that he was, insane or had some mental issues, and he ended up dying without even seeing the research that he started going forward. Of course, later, other doctors, decades later, they would come back on this research, they would find out the studies, and they will apply in different hospitals, and finally, that would be the accepted rule. But the lesson here is quite straight to the point, right? People are normally afraid about something that is scared them about a big change or being responsible for changes. And the problem is, usually people say, sometimes they even say that in interviews, or they say that to their manager, that they love change, they love to work in an environment where they have changes, but there is a limit for that. In the first quarter of 2026, the world of work produced an insane amount of changes in the structure of the companies, changes in the way of work in different industries, and research now, current research with data from beginning of this year and end of 2025 is showing that this is actually starting to affect people working on those different companies. And I know that you heard this before many times. The world is changing faster than ever, and of course, there's a difference between knowing that the world is changing and being affected by major changes all the time around you, like in the way you work, in the way you do things. And the research that I got in front of me, and you can check this later if you want, is from Deloitte, published in a partnership with Oxford Economics. They interviewed more than 9,000 leaders in 89 different countries. So the data is quite well structured to showcase that this is not just a tendency in one country, one industry. This is actually a global thing. And the data is quite scary, actually. The first number that caught my attention is probably the biggest one. It's a number for a headline, for example. One in three workers worldwide went through 15 or more significant organizational changes in the past 12 months. One in three workers with more than 15 changes that affected like the organization structure in the past 12 months. That is insane. That is insane. It's basically saying that your manager is changing, the structure of your organization, your area, your sector is changing, the structure on the way you produce your work is changing all this time, sometimes more than than one time per month. It's what the data is showing. It's not me, it's data. And it's a well researched, well conducted research in this case across the world. So it's not a localized data for one single country or industry, as I said. Other number that caught my attention was that only 27% of those workers believe that the organization is managing change in a good way. That is very, very terrible to hear if you're leading or managing an organization. Only 27% of people believe organizations are managing changes in a good way. And then this is for the leaders on those companies. 85% of the leaders says that building adaptability or preparing the organization to change is critical, is important, but only 7% say that they're actually making progress on doing that in a better way. 85% think that is critical, 7% say that they are doing something good on this topic. Again, Deloitte, Oxford Economics, 89 countries, 9,000 leaders, hundreds of thousands of workers to come with this data that is super relevant. And I normally criticize a lot when people bring, you know, data from one thing like this one, good, good and critical numbers to analyze, and they connect that with another research that it's not it's not confirmed that there's a relation between them. So be careful because what I'm saying here is just my opinion. I have no proof at this point that we can connect those two data. I'm just doing this disclaimer to avoid a confusion. But in the beginning of 2026, I also read in some other papers that the numbers of workers going on burnout or sick leave because of mental problems or anxiety is on the top. It's the biggest number of workings leaving their jobs because of mental problems or burnout is the biggest number in history. Again, I cannot prove, I don't have the data that connects this information about mental illness and burnout with the impressive number of changes that we are seeing at the same time. But in my opinion, and this is simply my opinion, you can disagree or not, it's quite easy to see a connection on those things. Because changes, when they are too much, when they're exaggerated, they make us anxious to actually know where should I put my energy, who I should impress. It's not that we should work to impress someone, but I mean, we want to make a difference, right? Sometimes in a customer, sometimes for a customer, sometimes it's for a specific manager because there is a promotion or opportunity to grow in the company. So you can prepare yourself to something. But when things are changing so fast, how could you prepare? It's impossible. And the numbers here, they show the gap, and the gap exists, right? The gap between the perception that change management is important, no question about it, But the perception that companies are doing something effectively around it, it's terrible. It's less than 10% of leaders saying that their companies are doing something on this topic. And I'm very strong. I'm a very strong position normally that management should be seen as a science with its techniques, with its frameworks, and you should apply it in the correct way. Same way that you apply for software development, same way you apply for engineering, same way you apply in many other areas, chemistry, rocket science. Management is also something that has its techniques to be applied, and people think that this is just like uh, nonsense, and they forget there are ways of doing things in a good way, to define a strategy, to move with that strategy, to cancel a strategy should not be implemented, but everything around change management, it is important. And the term that we are seeing in this research, it's called the change fatigue. So it's basically people being tired of so many changes, so tired that they cannot even realize where they should be positioned or how they should be positioned themselves anymore in their company, thinking on their growth. Because if things are changing all the time, managers structure everything, where should I go next? Let's say you were working the same position for 5 6 years, you want to go to a next level, you want to jump in the company ladder. Where is the ladder? What is exactly the next step for you? It's impossible to know if you had 15 changes in your structure in the past 12 months. And the reflection here, of course, or the main one at least, because we can make many different reflections, this one is of course, when was the last time that you actually saw a good change happen? One that you see and look, that makes sense. That is a good change on the structure. Things will move faster. The customer will see the value in a better way. We are going to communicate better. Think about that. When was the last one? Because there are good changes and there are great ways of making change happening. But companies are forgetting how to do that. And this has a price. And the price who is paying right now are the workers. I think this is, if we talk about changes in 2026, of course, we are going to talk about how fast technology is moving, right? And specifically how fast AI solutions are spreading around us. It's even hard to follow what is the latest, what around or arrived this week, what is the latest best model for images, for videos, for whatever. It's hard to follow. But one thing that is confirmed is that for sure AI is already affecting us somehow, for good or for bad. But the question in the air, talking about changes and talk about AI, is how is the gap right now between the expectations that we have or that we had with AI and the actual results? For the last 3 years, companies are adopting or have been adopting AI solutions, different kind of AI solutions, and trying to internalize artificial intelligence in their process, trying to bring something to be realistic, try to apply a use case, or try to at least have AI in their companies to the sake of show to the market that they are following the trends. The problem is we are seeing layoffs because of or with the justification that AI is making the company more productive. We are seeing many companies justify their restructure and their reorganization and hundreds of changes all the time happening because of AI. But now the results are arriving. Around 3 years, many projects using AI actually with enough data to see what were the expectations in the beginning and the actual results. And the data is showing that things are not paying off, or at least they are not giving the return that was expected. And this is not one company, it's not you. Actually, many important companies are doing this research right now and getting or coming with the same conclusion. There is a big gap between the expectation we had with AI from a business perspective, not the technology itself, not how good it is evolving or not. This is not the point, but in terms of applying AI in the companies and seeing the actual result, the actual return on investment. Because those companies that are announcing layoffs, for example, they are not showing any results, the actual gain in the productivity that they were saying or justifying when they announced the layoff. And see the data here, because as I said, it's not one company. McKinsey is saying that only 39% of companies' reports are measuring some financial good impact from AI projects. Only 39%. A report from Kendro, also from the beginning of this year, is showing that 61% of leaders are under more pressure to prove some results coming from AI applications or applying AI in their areas. But this pressure is not being realistic to what they actually can show in return for the senior management. So basically, we're not having a good return on investment, a good ROI to showcase that AI was applied in a specific process and that sustained the investment that was made. Another report from Gartner, this is a very strong one, by the way, it's showing that we are going to this phase. Any innovation who had this phase that is called the trough of disillusionment, or basically the gap between the big expectation on the hype of the innovation to what we're actually seeing that in practice. Any kind of innovation would have the same level. You have a big hype in the beginning. Smartphone could have a big hype. Internet, websites, social media, everything has a big hype. And then you start to realize what it was just expectation, what is reality. And you have this, this drop in the curve because people are realizing that this is great, this is fantastic, but my expectation was here and the reality is around here. So you have a kind of problem on this, and Gartner is showing that AI is going to this kind of curve right now. And then finally, a research from MIT, which, by the way, we discussed in one other video in my channel, so you can search about that. But this report is super impressive, showing within a research with many different companies, many different industries, that only 5% of generative AI pilots in many different companies are actually achieving some actual result or actually, revenue or good return on investment. So basically, 95% of the projects are failing from that perspective. Okay, we can agree it's a very good and valid argument to say that all those projects, they are failing to give a return from a money perspective or investment perspective, but they are making the company learn more or fail faster in something and learn more with that. That's okay. It's a very valid reflection, a reflection that I would also um, at least bring here for us to discuss more. But that is not the point of this data when you put all those things together. The most important point is the gap between the expectation and the reality we have right now for the beginning of 2026. This report from MIT is really nice because they basically showcase the three most important things that those projects having success are doing differently. And in this case, is basically having one, a very specific use case. So not just use AI, but use AI in a very specific process for one specific reason. The second is having a good integration into real workflow in the company. So not just giving AI for the workers and expect things to change, but actually putting AI in a very specific part of your value change to do something that makes sense to be improved using AI, for example. And finally, the number three is the right tool for the right context. So it's not just about, again, giving away AI in many different projects and trying to just use because other companies are doing, but understand what is exactly the AI tool that can help my business to do something better in, yeah, more, it could be faster, it can be more productive, more efficient way. But the reflection is, of course, quite interesting, right? I don't know how you are thinking after seeing this data because the numbers are coming from different sources. But in your company, is AI actually giving different and good results? Or for now, is it still also just part of this big hype and you are not seeing something changing for real? I can say that I've been seeing very good use cases. I will not lie. very good ones to make things more efficient or more, or at least faster. And again, faster is not good if you are doing faster the wrong thing. So I'm against on just doing something faster because that's good. No, it doesn't make sense. If you are building the wrong thing faster, is still the wrong thing. But of course, you can learn a lot by validating hypotheses faster and improving your process, improving how you create value to your customers. But still, the question in there is important. Is AI for you and for your company right now just an illusion and have big expectations, or are you actually seeing those results? Please let me know. I'm curious to see some good stories for good and for bad. But finally, we have the third topic for our discussion today. And as I mentioned, everything here is a little bit connected. We have the problem on the so many changes. And then we have this big illusion with AI, which basically is connected still to changes and changes happening all the time. But then we have some data showing us that trust in senior leadership is on a very, very low level at this point. And I am sure there's a connection between the topics here today. Let's try to understand that because it's always about narrative, right? There is there is a comforting narrative right now around many different companies that leaders can say that people trust in the way we do things here. We are doing this for many years. People trust the way things happen. But the reality in this beginning of 2026 is showing that actually people are losing the trust in a very fast pace in their senior leadership. A report from Randstad interviewed 27,000 workers in 100 and yeah 1,200 and different companies. Sorry, I was checking the data directly from the report now for you. So 1,200 companies in 35 different countries. And the numbers are showing that for the first time in history, we are seeing that people are losing the trust in senior leadership in a very, as I mentioned, fast pace. And that is going not is not being connected to the people specifically there, but more about the strategy of the companies. Because basically, the trust in senior leadership fell globally from 77% to 72% in 12 months. You can think, okay, 77% to 72, that's not that much, but is the lowest level in history. And then among Generation Z, this number is even lower. It's around 67%, another big or quite low level for trust. But the gap we see here is basically that people are replacing where the trust is going right now. And they are still with a high trust in their connected leader or their close manager, the one who is leading their teams. The same report showed that people have this kind of trust established between the teams that are working and their direct managers. But the company itself and the direction those senior leaders are moving the company in the future, this is where the low trust is decreasing and decreasing more and more. Of course, if we talk about changes, that is maybe quite easy to understand. With so many changes in the organizational structure and the strategy and the connection between strategy definition and execution, it's maybe quite obvious to see that people will start losing trust because you are changing all the time. You are changing our structure, you are changing the whole strategy, which should be actually a long term thing. Okay, you can use the AI excuse again, but it's not only that, right? Companies are losing their pace of being sure on where they want to be positioned and what they want to be doing in 5, 10 years. And that is maybe something that is the new normal for many different industries because the world is changing completely every single year. But from a working perspective, you don't expect that the way you work or the direction you are moving change every single month, right? And that is exactly the point that is generating this kind of trust issue right now around the world. People no longer trust the company itself. That is the point of the research. They still trust their close leaders, and they still have this trust established around the teams, which I think is actually a good sign to think about, because what is started with the agile way of working was actually a movement around trust between people, around people, everything around people in the center for producing value to other people who are going to use their product or service. Many people still don't understand, unfortunately, many workers still don't understand the point of agile. They still think that is about certifications. They still think that is about, uh, you know, the framework you use, the name you give to the role. It's not about that. It is about trust. It is about trust that your team is working together with you to build something valuable, and that more connected or staying close to the customer is the best way to make sure that you are building the right value to the right person on the right time. So trust is what basically built the pillars for an agile way of working. But now in 2026, what we see is that leaders are facing this big gap in what they define from a strategic perspective for their companies and what they are actually executing. And the final data I want to bring here on this study and this report is this one, because I think this is where one another big reflection could be happening. 95% of employers or the senior leaders of those companies are very optimistic about 2026 against only 51% of the workers on the teams. 95% against 51%. The gap on this optimism is super huge, because if senior leaders are optimistic, but the people who are executing are not, you know what is going to happen, right? People are not going to move in the same pace that is expected. Companies or senior leadership will realize they need to change again, and then we go in this big circle of strategic change, gain of optimism up there, people don't execute and you change again. Something need to happen here, because this is not, this model of work is not sustainable anymore. And I want to make the criticism normally when I bring a topic here for us to discuss is also with a kind of solution or alternative that at least see as an option. But in this case, I want to have the open discussion, because I still don't have a conclusion. What do you think it's causing the trust issue around the companies, or at least in the industry that you work? Do you think that people leading those companies are not understanding something that maybe the works are seeing, or is just the word that is completely different right now for some reason, or is something else? Because I don't think it's reasonable to just point a finger and say senior leaders are taking the wrong decision. I don't think this is fair, because senior leaders or people in those positions, they take decisions based on the data they get, and this data normally come, or is expected to come, from the teams, people working under them, executing the work. So if they don't have the good data to decide to move the company to the right direction, it's not only the responsibility, it's the whole company responsibility. If the company fail, it will fail to everyone. If the company succeed, it will succeed to everyone. But in your opinion, what is creating this big trust issue, and people don't feel comfortable anymore to the future where their companies are heading to? With this question, I think we close this overview around some big topics that were around the work environment in this beginning of 2026 that affected so much our careers, the way we lead, and the way we are managing our business as well. As you know, this podcast exists for us to gather, reflect, and grow. Because 1% better today, it's already so much better than the version that we were yesterday, right? And we want to keep reflecting, keep going to the root cause of things, because we know that the hype is just a hype. things will go, things will pass, and you're still going to be here working, trying to make your money, try to become more visible, trying to build your personal branding, try to make your life in the best way possible, build your career, lead people in a good and fair way, and manage your business to get the results expected. And this podcast is here to support you with the content that we believe is the right one to be discussed right now. Sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's an article from 20 years ago that is becoming relevant again. But sometimes it's something that is happening right now, this week. And at the beginning of 2026, those are some of the topics that I thought would be very interesting to have a discussion with you today. So thank you for staying with me. This is Meller Notes Podcast. My name is William Meller, and see you in the next episode.